Joining me from Skype from Chicago, Alderman Raymond Lopez of Chicago's 15th Ward. Alderman Lopez, first and foremost, Alderman, you heard the superintendent there, but the reality is this is a problem. Do you believe Chicago Police Department are doing their job when it comes to stopping these shootings and killings?
Well, first off, good morning. And I think they're doing their job to the best of their ability. Unfortunately, they are handcuffed, if you will, by our ACLU agreement with regards to the stop and frisk policies. In the old days, as many of my residents will attest to, police would pull people over or approach people who they felt were suspicious or looked as though they needed to be talked to about their activities. Unfortunately, now police can't do that. Police have to have probable cause in order to engage anyone in the neighborhood. And that has, in some ways, emboldened some of the criminality to act out and be more aggressive and be more bold in their efforts.
Alderman, let me ask you a question about that, though, because we saw in New York where they had stop and frisk, and then when they stopped stop and frisk in New York, there was no increase in the violence there. And so how is that possible that in New York there was no increase, but you're saying that's the reason in Chicago? Because shouldn't you have probable cause to stop somebody and frisk them? Because when you say they look suspicious, what does that even mean?
We spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, training our police officers to be very aware and be very cognizant of the individuals that they are approaching on the street. Basically refining their gut instinct to be able to know who criminals are and who the people that they need to pay attention to. To say that we have individuals that we know are gang members, that we know are drug dealers, that we may know are prostitutes, and not be able to approach them and ask them what they're doing without catching them in the act of, recruiting as gang members or throwing gang signs or selling drugs or being a prostitute, really hampers our efforts in the neighborhood.
Alderman, one second. I'm trying to understand here. Okay. I'm trying to understand. How do you know somebody is a gang member? And you're saying, because now here's the other piece here. Okay. You're talking about stop and frisk. Police can set up barricades. They can do checks of people coming into high crime areas, checking driver's licenses, things along those lines. That's happened in other cities across the country. I was a City Hall reporter in Fort Worth. That was one of the tactics they used where they would drop a dragnet on a particular area. We see this even with DUI checks. And so what you're describing, though, is literally you want Chicago police to be engaged in racial profiling?
Well, no one said anything about charging people by race. We're being aware of what their past history is. There's a difference.
But Alderman, I gotta ask you though.
I really recommend that.
Alderman, I gotta ask you.
It's really not fair to say we're simply doing it based on racial profiling. You're doing it by their pattern, their history as individuals.
Well, Alderman Lopez, I gotta ask you this question. Alderman Lopez,
just part of what is causing the issue, not totally, but part of it.
But Alderman, I gotta ask you this here, and again, I lived in Chicago for 6 years. I ran the Chicago Defender, radio show on WVON. What I'm trying to understand is, how do cops know someone is a gang member? And you're saying, well, they know their history. If I'm looking at somebody and I know nothing about them, how do I know their history when all I'm looking at is what they're wearing and they're standing somewhere? That's what I'm trying to understand your point.
If you are a police officer who've worked their beat and you've arrested the same individual for throwing gang signs, for disorderly conduct and everything else, and that individual has identified themselves publicly as being as a gang member, and you see them on the street again throwing gang signs or again following kids from grammar schools trying to recruit them, it's not outside the scope of reality to say that you are aware that that person is a gang member. You're not racially profiling them. You are just using their past pattern as grounds to stop whatever future activities that they're trying to do.
So, Alderman, has superintendent...
That is not racial profiling. That is just using...
Has Superintendent Johnson told you and the city council that's what he needs to stop all of this?
No, he is not. He has not vocalized that. But I will tell you that from whether it's the west side to the south side to the upper north side to the central part of Chicago, a number of people are recognizing that when they say that they want the police to go out and do their job, that the job that they want them to do is no longer possible because of this ACLU agreement.
And that ACLU, and just correcting, that ACLU agreement was because of the fact that the Chicago Police Department had a history of police abuse, and then also the problem in Chicago is that they did have a problem when it comes to racial profiling. I mean, that's why there is an agreement, correct?
No, the agreement was to be proactive to avoid being involved in any kind of lawsuits regarding stop and frisk, as we've seen in other parts of the country.
But Chicago has spent more than $500 million in settlements as a result of police abuse cases in the past decade?
In probably a little more than a decade, they've spent over $550 million settling police lawsuits for all types of issues, not just police abuse. Whether it was because people were involved in police shootings, because they were injured because of some sort of action taken by police related to a different kind of law enforcement. It wasn't just police abuse. It was all manner of lawsuit involving the Chicago Police Department.
Okay. All right, Alderman Lopez. Well, again, one of the things that I'm waiting, I would love to hear the perspective from Superintendent Johnson as to what tools that he believes he needs when it comes to stopping crime there. But I do know from living there and talking to lots of different people there, they have a serious problem if you're talking about racial profiling there in the Windy City.
Well, the only one talking about racial, unfortunately, the only one talking about racial profiling is you, because
actually, that's not true, sir.
If you really want to get to the heart of what driving the crime in this city is the lack of opportunity and lack of investment. To create more jobs, we'll do a far better job
I agree.
of reducing crime than having, whether it's you support this ACLU agreement or you don't.
Well, I agree.
The lack of opportunity that has existed historically for generations in certain segments of our city. Addressing that will have a greater impact in reducing crime than anything that you and I are talking about right now.
First of all, Alderman Lopez, I agree with that as somebody who's covered this story, but I can tell you right now, as somebody who's also talked to black aldermen in Chicago, they do have a concern with what you're talking about. If you're talking about racial profiling with stop and frisk, I know because I've actually talked to them, but I certainly appreciate it. We'll actually have them on the show as well to discuss this very issue. Thank you so very much.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. News 1 Now with Roland Martin. Every weekday morning at 7 on TV 1.